Good morning. Thank you everybody for joining. I'm just going to, if someone could let me know in the chat that you can hear me okay, that would be wonderful. It shows that we're good. Just want to make sure everybody can hear me. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Nikki Kruger, and I am the Director of Marketing and Business Development for Santa Fe Dehumidifiers. And today we're going to be discussing how to grow revenue with dehumidifiers. Oh, hopefully this will go. Trying to get my screen to go forward here. Not sure what's going on. There we go. So for those of you that are not familiar with Santa Fe, we are a division of Thermistor. We manufacture basement and crawl space dehumidifiers along with whole house ventilating dehumidifiers. We actually invented whole house ventilating dehumidification, as well as we were to market the first ones to market for crawl space dehumidifiers, so the horizontal dehumidifiers that are typically used in crawl spaces. We also manufacture Quest dehumidifiers, which is our commercial line, and then Phoenix restoration equipment. So I bring that up because it's really important to understand that the components that are used in our restoration and commercial dehumidifiers are also used in our residential dehumidifiers. And that is why we come to market with that 6-year warranty, because we are using commercial components and really giving you a commercial grade dehumidifier. So I've been involved in the industry for almost 20 years now. I'm a HERSNet certified home rater, member of several ACA committees, actually teamed up with some building science experts to develop a two-day crawl space encapsulation training course, and I'm also sit on the building envelope committee for the Spray Foam Association. Now, before we dive any deeper into this, there's always one basic component that I want to make sure that everybody understands, and this is the second law of thermodynamics. And this is really what we need to think about when we are looking at dehumidification in homes. And that is hot goes to cold, wet goes to dry, and high goes to low. So anytime that we go in and we try to look at a customer's home, decide if dehumidification is the answer, we really need to kind of look at what's going on to make sure that when we apply that dehumidifier, it's going to be successful. And so as we go in deeper on the different ways that code approved ways to condition a crawl space to manage moisture, we always need to keep in mind this thermodynamics law. Hot goes to cold, wet goes to dry, and high goes to low. So crawl spaces, what is the opportunity for you here? So they're widely used in construction. About 250,000 new homes a year are built on crawl spaces, and there's already an estimated 76 million homes already in existence that have crawl spaces. Now, a majority of them are still unconditioned or open vented crawl spaces, but we're seeing more and more in the last several years, a lot of homeowners looking for their crawl spaces to be closed, as well as building codes and green building standards are also now encouraging crawl spaces to be closed or encapsulated, especially if the mechanical systems are going to be located in those areas. So we are seeing building codes incentivizing builders to close those crawl spaces, because if the mechanicals and the duct work are going to be located there, we don't want to be sucking in that moist, hot air during the humid hot seasons. So we're seeing more and more this drive for crawl spaces to be closed. So why do we encapsulate crawl spaces? Energy consumption is a big one. If it's hot outside and that air's coming below the home, you're going to be heating up that space. The majority of the reason for an energy is typically in colder times of the year, like right now, where you have a crawl space that's vented to the outside. Even with that insulation up in the ceiling of the crawl space, we're still bringing a lot of cold air into the house. So energy consumption is a big one. According to Advanced Energy, homes with vented crawl spaces are 19 times more likely to experience high relative humidity levels in excess of 70%. This can lead to a lot of rot, cupped, bucklewood, hardwood floorings, damage to cabinetry. So really, again, if it's hot and humid outside and we're bringing in that air below, we're causing a lot of damage below that home that ultimately is going to go into the house. And termites and other pests thrive. And then high humidity crawl space contributes to microbial growth, structural issues, and poor indoor air quality in living spaces. So there's a lot of reasons to not have vented crawl spaces in our homes. We know better now. So encapsulation process, this is about as deep as we're going to go into the actual process, but we got to address bulk water first, air infiltration, water vapor, and then we got to manage moisture. So moisture management is what we're going to focus on of this process, because we're going to be going into spaces that hopefully all this other stuff has already been addressed, but they might not be using the best moisture management system in order to control the RH. So crawl spaces like this, they're out there. This is incredible. They're ideal. This is what we would hope every closed crawl space would look like. Most of the time, hopefully, when we're going into crawl spaces, we're seeing them at least to this level. We've got a good quality vapor barrier on the walls, on the floor. The air infiltration has been addressed, not only from the outside into the crawl space, but also hopefully from the crawl space into the living space. Now, this also might be considered a closed crawl space, but adding a dehumidifier to this, you're probably just going to end up with an unhappy homeowner, because obviously this has a lot of more moisture issues than something that typically just a dehumidifier can handle. So if you are into fixing crawl spaces with liner and other things, you could probably tackle this and add a dehumidifier. If not, someone who does close crawl spaces for a living would probably have to come in and do a little bit more work on this before a dehumidifier could be applied to this house. So moisture management, high humidity, even in closed crawl spaces without proper engineering of some moisture management system, they still will experience high humidity levels at certain times of the year. So that's going to be damage to the home. If anybody in the home has health-related respiratory issues due to possible microbial growth and other things that can be affected by high relative humidity, that could be an issue. Mold problems and pest problems. Of course, if you're in the pest industry, you know that pests like high humidity. So 85% and above, we get wood rot, blistering of paint. 75% and above, we get cupping of hardwood floors, staining on walls and ceilings. And when you're consistently above 60%, there are conditions that are created that are good for mold and mildew growth, or microbial growth also, as we will relate it to here. So mold needs three things to grow: organic food source, elevated moisture, and temperatures. So crawl spaces, even when they are closed or encapsulated, can still have that elevated moisture. They still have those temperatures, and they still have the organic food source. So even if they are really well closed crawl spaces, but they're not using something to actually remove moisture, they still can have high moisture levels. So this is just kind of in here because unless you are a qualified mold remediator or someone who has the certifications to identify mold, we do not encourage you to ever use the word mold when you are talking to homeowners. Microbial growth, you probably will see in a closed crawl space in certain climate zones if they are not using a dehumidifier, where there will be some sort of microbial growth, usually in the far corners. But again, we are not here to advocate that you identify that, because if you see here, the #1 Google photo for crawl space mold is actually efflorescence, which is minerals that are coming through that block. It is not mold. So if there is mold, we encourage you to have that homeowner look for someone to remediate that if you are not qualified. So to stop mold or microbial growth, you got to control the moisture. The wood moisture content needs to be less than 16%, and the relative humidity throughout the space should be maintained below 60%. So uncontrolled relative humidity, we talked about how wood will swell actually, that leads to the cabinet and the moisture, but actually if we've got the pillars in the crawl space, that can start, or the floor joists, and then also the cabinetry in the space. So what we're going to talk about now is, according to building code, all of the different ways that are accepted to condition a crawl space. Now, I'm going to throw up the 2021 because this is the latest building code, and then I'm going to touch on 2018, and then we're going to kind of discuss why you need to know these. Now, 2021 will always trump 2018 and then 2015. So if you are applying one of these conditioning codes, ways to meet code, according to 2021, that trumps what was in 2018. So I know I had an email recently that from a contractor working in Virginia saying that Virginia's on 2018. I can't use 2021. And that's not true. If you go to the next year, that will always, they're not going to penalize you for doing better. So if you go above and beyond to the next code version, then it meets code. So one of the following is provided, and this is from the 2021 IRC. Continuously operated mechanical exhaust ventilation at a rate equal to 1 cubic foot per minute for each 50 square feet of the crawl space floor area, including a pathway from the common area into the crawl space. So we'll dive into that a little bit deeper. And I'm showing you all these and going through these because when you go into a crawl space that's been closed, by code, it's got to be using one of these. You need to be able to identify which one it is using, because if the RH in that space is still too high, then you're going to have to talk to the homeowner about why their method, hopefully there is a method of how their meeting code is not working, and then what that solution would be. But you need to be able to identify what method they are using. So conditioned, I'm going to close that, conditioned air supply to deliver at a rate equal to 1 cubic feet per minute. And again, you have to have a return pathway. We'll dive into that deeper. Plenum and existing structures complying with section, basically using the floor joist as a plenum. I'm going to touch on this. I don't think I've ever seen this in a crawl space. I would hope to God really not to, and we'll go into that, but it can't be used in new construction. It is only in existing structures. And then dehumidification size in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications. So we actually have worked with Joe Steenbrook from Building Science Corp in order to get dehumidifiers into code. The first year that we worked on this to get it into code was actually 2018. So this is a 2018 code. Basically, everything's the same except for dehumidification size to provide 70 pints of moisture removal per day for every 1,000 square foot of crawl space floor space area. After this was put into 2018, it was recognized that this probably wasn't the best solution, or the wording was not the best way to go about this for conditioning crawl spaces, especially when there's so much variation in the ceiling height of crawl spaces, the moisture that's still infiltrating that area. So that's why we went to the next code year. We had it reworked up to going back to this size in accordance with manufacturer's specifications. It was funny when we were working on this as a group that was proposing this. They thought it might be too simple for code because code's supposed to be more complicated. But really, we wanted to make it as simple as possible. So size in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications. And we'll dive a little bit more into what that means. So again, if your state jurisdiction is on 2018 and it says 70 pints, and that's possibly overkill for what it needs, you can pull out the manufacturer's recommendation or recommendations for sizing according to 2021 code, and that does meet code. Now, you're going to have to work with your inspector on that. But that's the way it works. So I'm just going to check here if we got any questions. Anybody want to throw any questions into the chat as we're going along? Please feel free to do that. Continuously operated mechanical exhaust ventilation. Okay, so the pros of this, the equipment is relatively inexpensive, and that's what you're going to see. All of these that we go through where equipment is relatively inexpensive, that's probably what the builder is going to do. Or if another contractor, the other contractors come in and encapsulate it or close that crawl space and sold the homeowner on an inexpensive way to condition it. So we're going to see a lot of those out there, but the reality is, you know, once that's been operating that way for a while, typically it's not controlling the moisture in those spaces. And conditioning a crawl space, really the only thing that you truly need to worry about, if it's been properly closed, air infiltration's been minimized, bulk water's been taken care of, water vapor's been addressed, you're really only concerned about the relative humidity in that space at that point. So conditioning really means moisture control. So the cons of this mechanical exhaust ventilation is it potentially, most likely in the humid times of the year, is going to increase the relative humidity in the home, in the living space. And I'll show you why in a minute. Not good for indoor air quality. You can't set it to a specific RH, and it can cause comfort issues throughout the house. And the reason being is this is what that is going to look like in the crawl space. So basically, we've got our floor grill, which is allowing conditioned air per code. We have to have this in there to come in from the house, and we are exhausting out the vent in the crawl space. The challenge with this is when you exhaust air out, makeup air has got to be brought into that house somewhere. The house is always trying to equalize. So when we talk about that thermodynamics, the second law, where high goes to low, so if we're exhausting here, that means probably in the attic area, we're pulling air in. So that potentially is bringing hot, humid air from the outside into those upper levels of the living space and pulling through the rest of the living space to exhaust. We typically don't want to create that sort of negative pressure, especially in hot, humid climates where most of the time is where we are seeing crawl spaces being used. So would not recommend, if you see this in a house, just, you know, starting in the spring, summer, fall, if you're taking RH measurements in that crawl space, you're probably going to have some pretty high levels going on there. So conditioned supply air in the crawl space. I see this one quite a bit. So really no equipment is needed besides some supply register and floor register. The theory is that when you're air conditioning, and I'm looking at it from the humid season, when you're air conditioning, that you're putting drier air into that space. The challenge with this is that air usually is cold air, and when you decrease the temperature of air, you increase the RH. So every degree that you go down in temp, the RH goes up 2%. So that's why relative humidity might not be the best way to measure this. Dew point oftentimes is, but so we're putting cold air into a cool space, and that's only going to happen if the homeowners are running the air conditioning based on what's going on in the living space. So you could have high humidity down there, and just trying to control it with which is really diluting with some cool, drier air from the living space. So really not a good conditioning method for controlling the relative humidity. And this one I see, again, because it's inexpensive, I see it quite a bit throughout the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast. And that's what this would look like. They basically tapped into the supply plenum and put in a supply register. And so here is a rendering of how that looks. Basically, you've got your passive return grill here, and then you're doing some supply air from that. So again, here's another illustration, conditioned air, and then we've got our floor grill there to share the air between the spaces. So this is actually some data that we collected in Northern Virginia on 2 habitat houses that were built on the same lot, basically same exact houses. And I'm just going to walk through these quickly because I know there's a lot of data here. So these dotted lines are what is going on in the crawl space, and the solid lines are what's going on outside. So we had 2 exact homes. We encapsulated them both. One of them we put in a dehumidifier, and the other one we used the supply air from the AC to control. And this is just a kind of a glimpse here of what was going on. But basically I had to shut off the alarm on the one using the air supply because it was consistently above 70% throughout the spring, summer, and fall. But here you can see when we add a dehumidifier, now we had set this one pretty low because it was new construction, and before they actually finished up the home and closed it up for the homeowners to move in, they did have to remediate that crawl space just from running electrical wires and stuff like that through it. So we set it low from the get-go to kind of dry out the crawl space, but you know, we have a good dew point going on here, probably around 50%, 55 is ideal. We've got low RH. We did go back in and increase this, set it up a little bit higher to 55% after we saw, you know, that we had it dried it out pretty good. And the temperature is pretty consistent, about, you know, 74 degrees probably in this crawl space. over here, and here's, you know, the RH, we had some rainy times going on here, so you can kind of see that we're keeping it controlled no matter what's going on outside. Or again, we're in April in Northern Virginia, not a lot of AC time going on. Now this other house here, again, we've got rainy times, same time of the year. We got the dew points that are getting above 60 degrees here. So anywhere where the surfaces are 60 degrees or above, we're going to start having condensation. And the relative humidity was consistently getting to that 70%. And again, if you're counting on supply air, that means that AC has to be running to put that drier air into that spot. So just not a consistent way to control the relative humidity. So underfloor space used as a plenum, again, if you go into code, this is prohibited in new structures. It's only for repairs to underfloor plenums. Basically what that means is you're turning this cavity in the floor joist into a path for supply and return air for the HVAC system to control, to condition that space. I wouldn't recommend it. If you see this in a crawl space, this is probably your number one opportunity to sell a dehumidifier for sure. You know, this air then is traveling throughout their house because it is being pulled or supplied into the HVAC system. So huge opportunity there. Other ways from code years past, or just strategies where someone might not even meet code, might go in and try to condition that space, is using a powered fan between the crawl space and living space. Basically just, again, sharing the air between the living space and the crawl space to condition it to try to control the relative humidity. And here's an illustration of what that might look like. So if you see a powered fan, and now this is not radon, this is completely, you know, that kind of looks like a radon fan, but this is not to address radon. This is just to bring in that air from the living space. And then powered exhaust fan between the crawl space and the outside. So basically we're trying to control that air below the home using a powered exhaust fan. So these typically run off some sort of sensor that identifies when the RH in that floor, in that crawl space has gotten too high, and it'll exhaust air out and bring in through another vent makeup air into that crawl space. And again, this only works if it's drier outside than it is in the crawl space, which typically is not going to be during the spring, summer, fall, the humid times when dew points are high outside. And again, if it's cold outside, which is typically going to be the time of the year when it's drier outside than in that space, you're probably bringing in colder air, which then can create cold floors, high energy use, that sort of thing. And that's what something like that might look like. So these are all ways that you can identify potentially what conditioning method they're using for that crawl space. So the two things they have in common, typically little to no equipment costs. So again, a lot of builders who are getting into closing their crawl spaces, these are typically going to be their first choices for meeting code. They do not manage humidity year round. And the other most important thing is it allows for communication between the crawl space and the living space. So for those of you that are in the pest industry that are on this webinar, you know, we know, especially for termites, at times there's going to be chemicals that are going to have to be utilized in that crawl space. And typically we don't want those chemicals being pulled in or shared with the living space. So again, all of these allow for that communication, typically, unless you're just using those exhaust fans on the crawl space without the floor grill. So what to look for? If you're going into a home that is utilizing these other methods for conditioning a crawl space, this is a prime opportunity for you to be able to propose a dehumidifier to the homeowners. And there's other things that you can look for to be able to propose this outside of what they're already using. So immediately, if you walk into that living space and there's musty odors, that's most likely because 50% of the air in the home typically at some point during the year is going to come from that crawl space. That's typically during the heating times, but it's going to be sharing some of that air, no matter how well that they try to minimize the airflow from the crawl space to the living space, you know, with caulking and spray foam and all of that. There always is going to be communication to some extent. So you will smell musty odors in the living space. You're going to do measurements. How high is the RH in that crawl space? That's very important to be able to share with the homeowners. If you walk into the living space and they've got the thermostat set pretty low during the cooling season, it could be more because of a comfort issue. That's what people do. They're uncomfortable in their homes. It doesn't matter if it's due to high RH or temperature. The first thing they're going to do is go to their comfort control center, which is the thermostat, and start cranking down that thermostat. So it could be just because they're getting high RH from that crawl space. Potentially, if there's condensation on the ductwork, that means that there's a high RH in that crawl space. Microbial growth could be any kind of growth in there. We don't know what it is, but we've got an environment where there's microbial growth happening. If they have turned to portable dehumidifiers, whether there's already a portable in that crawl space because they went out to Home Depot and bought one, or if they're using portables in the living space. Portable air cleaners as well. If you see those going on in the living space, it could be because there's an issue in that crawl space. And then obviously if they've got hardwood floor issues, that's something to look for as well. So typically meters needed if you are a contractor that wanted to go in and propose maybe a dehumidification. What we recommend is taking readings because homeowners can't argue with the data. So a hygrometer, something that's going to measure that temperature and relative humidity, and then also address some dew point as well as important. And then moisture meters. So we can get some, you know, the pillars, the floor joists. I usually recommend the non-pin ones because the pin ones will leave some marks in that wood, but get a moisture reading to see, is that wood absorbing moisture to a point that we could have an issue down there. There's a dew point calculator out there that I highly recommend. It's called dp.org or dp.org, yep, is the website. And it allows you basically to go in and put in whatever readings you get. You can go in and put in your readings. Now, this is, you know, probably more what's going on outside, not necessarily in that crawl space. But when you play with this and you put in what the temperature is and what that RH is in the crawl space, it's going to give you dew point. And again, dew point is where we're going to see condensation. It's also going to show you about how many days we have to a potential mold risk based on those conditions. So great resource, highly recommend it. dpcalc, cal.org is where you can find this. So why is crawl space isolation from the living space so important? Again, when we kind of talk about what's going on in that space, especially when it comes to potential pesticides being used, pressure treated wood that's used. We want to isolate the crawl space from the living space as much as possible. And there's an article out there that talks about all the contaminants that can exist in a crawl space. So a lot of times, again, all those other conditioning methods that are out there, most of them are sharing living space air with crawl space air. And my recommendation, and one of the biggest perks of using a dehumidifier, is not to have to do that, to isolate those two spaces as much as possible. And that's a huge selling point of using a dehumidifier in a closed crawl space versus all these other conditioning. So finally, dehumidification size in accordance with manufacturer's specifications. So it is the only way to truly control the relative humidity in that space to a set RH point. It can also decrease the humidity that's in the living space. Again, if we control it below the home, it won't be making its way into the home. Enables the isolation. Again, we're not sharing any of that air with the crawl space. Now the con is the equipment and the operation costs. But the reality is you cannot, there's always going to be an energy penalty for using dehumidification. But it's the only true way to protect the space. So a dehumidifier, I'm just checking here, any questions? No questions yet, it doesn't look like. A dehumidifier is the best option because, again, you can set it to that RH. When you control relative humidity below 60%, microbial or mold will not form on wood materials. Odor from bacteria will not be minimized. Again, if there's a musty odor, it is because there is some sort of bacterial microbial growth. That's what the musty odor comes from. Comfort levels in the living space will actually be improved. Now, if we control the relative humidity below the home, which means it's not making its way into the home, they should be able to actually set their thermostat at a higher temp because they're going to be more comfortable at a higher temperature with lower relative humidity, right? That's 95 degrees in Arizona versus 95 degrees in Florida. When you control that relative humidity, you will be more comfortable at a higher temperature. And then we're going to protect those, all the wood that is in the home as well. So humidity removal, this is the key, is the only solution with a dehumidifier. And it's removal, not dilution. All those other forms of conditioning a crawl space are dilution. And the more energy efficiently we see homes being built, the whole point of building an energy efficient, high performance, tight home, which code is getting us to those levels, is to run the largest system in the house as little as possible. So if we're counting on air conditioning to control the relative humidity in our crawl space, the tighter and tighter our homes get, the less that is even going to potentially be an option, even at peak load conditions during the middle of the summer. So I think what we'll see moving forward with our conditioning options of code is these other options might be going away because of how tightly and energy efficiently we are building our homes. So dehumidifier dries by condensing the moisture, getting it out of the space. High efficiency, you really want a high efficient dehumidifier. Low temperature operation. This is the big difference between those Home Depot big box store dehumidifiers versus a commercial grade crawl space dehumidifiers design, is that low temperature operation. A lot of those, once they get into a cooler 65 degree temp space like a crawl space, which that's the average temp, they're going to lose capacity very quickly. And I don't know, I remember growing up with one in the Midwest in our basement. And as soon as you turn that knob past one, it's turned into a solid block of ice just because it can't operate at those lower temps. And then also one with high air filtration. Our dehumidifiers have MERV 13 filtration, which if you collect, again, a lot of the particles in the air from below the home, it won't make its way into the crawl space. So sizing. That criteria for a dehumidifier as part of 2021 is according to the manufacturer's recommendations. And there is no regulations on the manufacturer what they can set for their sizing parameters. So, you know, I can say 1,000 square feet, and the next dehumidifier said, oh, well, they do 1,000, we do 2,000. So there is no regulation on claims of dehumidifier sizing. So you really have to become educated to understand this more. So there are three major factors that you need to consider when sizing a dehumidifier. How much humidity is in that space? Now, when you go in and measure the RH in that space on the day and time you are there, that's a snapshot in time. Now, you can put in data loggers to get a better understanding. So you're not always going to know just based on that particular time frame how much humidity is in that space. The size of the space, that one is, you know, you know that, and then the temperature inside the space also, because remember, for every degree it goes down, the RH goes up 2%. For every degree that the temperature increases, the RH goes down 2%. So understanding also more how RH and temp gives you a dew point, and dew point is going to let us know really how much moisture is in that space. But the understanding that we need to have here is, while it says manufacturer's recommendations, it is very easy to undersize a dehumidifier, and it's hard to oversize. I was kind of doing some reading on sizing of dehumidifiers and preparing for this just to see kind of what's out there. And there's a lot of articles or posts about how bad it is to oversize a dehumidifier because it's going to use all this energy and over dry the space. And that's just not the reality. When you set it to a specific RH, it's only going to run till it gets to that RH. Now, if you have too small of a dehumidifier that can't handle the moisture in the load in that space, it's going to run and run and run because it can't get to that setting. So you always want to have more capacity than you need. And so you will see in our sizing recommendations, we are extremely conservative in our recommendations because we always want you to have more capacity than you need. And you don't want a homeowner calling you because you sold them a dehumidifier that isn't doing what you told them it would do. So again, look at our sizing recommendations, and we are far more conservative than a lot of others out there, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So our lineup for dehumidifiers in the crawl space is, we have a compact 70, which we say about up to 1,800 square feet, and that's 8-foot ceilings. Now we're going to get a little bit more into the pros and cons of using the smallest dehumidifier according to that sizing. But the reality is we see this one go into crawl spaces probably the most because crawl space door size, being able to get it in there, but we want to be able to do some stuff to this in order to get maximum water removal with this, and we'll get into that. Our newest unit, which is the Oasis 105, this unit should fit into most crawl spaces, and really the one that we would recommend. It has dew point cutout, which is really important because when the temperatures do get a little bit lower in that crawl space, and again, wintertime, we'll get lower temperatures in that crawl space, but the RH can still be high, but the dew points are low, that we don't need a dehumidifier running. There's not that much water in the air. So this dew point cutout on the Oasis will prevent the unit from going into defrost, which ultimately extends the life of the dehumidifier because the dehumidifier isn't going into defrost mode. So there's a lot more information on our website on that unit, but it does have a digital control. It has a secondary drain pan built in. You can wire a float switch right onto it. There's handles in the base, and it's built on a skid, so it can be dragged carefully, as long as there's not any sharp objects underneath that liner, into the crawl space. So super cool unit, gives you, based on runtime or based on time, filter change, air codes, easy to troubleshoot for the homeowner as well. So really cool unit. And then for really big crawl spaces that have large access doors, we have this Santa Fe Impact 155. And that one we see go into a lot of larger homes. Again, crawl spaces that have higher ceilings, maybe coastal large homes, and then commercial applications as well. All right, just checking here. Any questions yet? All right. So one of the things that I had mentioned with that compact is dehumidifier air movement and ducting. We highly recommend that our dehumidifiers on the exhaust or the supply side, so the warm, dry air that's coming out of that dehumidifier, be ducted with flex duct away from the dehumidifier. So this will dramatically reduce the short cycling on that dehumidifier, because we're not creating this microclimate where the RH sensor in the dehumidifier is being affected by the dry air coming out of the back end of it. It also helps get that drier air to the farther corners where we might hit dew point potentially in those farther areas. And especially when you get odd sized shaped crawl spaces that might be like a T or an L or have an opening, you can distribute that dry air into those spaces and get better overall RH equilibrium in that space. And that's how this would look with that compact, where we're getting that drier air away from this area of the crawl space. This also allows us to be able to locate the dehumidifier in a easy accessible area that might be closer to the crawl space door, where we'll have an electrical plug. And we also know that it'll hopefully be maintained a little bit better if there's easier access. So typically dehumidifiers are recommended to be centrally located in the crawl space, but again, that makes it hard to get to them as well as to maintain them. So this, by ducting this, we're just getting that better communication of drier air throughout the space and enabling us to maintain that dehumidifier a little bit easier as well. So again, we talked about the big box units. Just not ideal. Also, if you ever go into a crawl space and you see one of these small big box portables, make sure that either you or you encourage the homeowner to go on to the consumer consumer protection website, because there's been massive recalls on millions of portable dehumidifiers that actually start on fire. So it's the control boards, and it's not specific to one manufacturer, because this control board manufacturer out of China supplied these to lots of portable dehumidifier manufacturers. and it causes them to start on fire. So some really scary YouTube videos out there. If you put dehumidifier fire into YouTube, you'll see people carrying them smoking out of their house, and all of a sudden they just burst into flames. I've actually been into several crawl spaces that I've seen these, went on the website with the homeowner and found out they were part of the recall. So again, something to be able to educate homeowners on about using those if they are. So homeowner benefits, better indoor air quality, not only in crawl spaces, if you're working in basements as well. Again, 50% of that air is making its way into the living space. So I know there's a lot of homes out there in the Mid-Atlantic, and actually we call them in the green grass climates, anywhere where you get about an inch of rain or more during the spring, summer, and fall a week. You are in a climate that should be using dehumidification, whether it's a crawl space or a basement. But that's better indoor air quality for the living space. Helps with adverse health effects or respiratory issues when you can control that humidity. Protects against damage in the home, greater comfort in the home, fewer pest problems. And then this gives you an opportunity to develop a longer term relationship with that homeowner. Because those dehumidifiers should be maintained. The condensate line should be looked at least once a year, and also the filters need to be changed out. So a long-term maintenance program with the homeowner also is a great benefit for both parties. So one of the questions that we often get is, what is the electrical usage of this dehumidifier? How much is my energy bill going to go up? So there's a website out there called RedCalc, and it's Residential Energy Dynamics. And they have a ventilation electrical usage calculator. So what I did is put in the power rating, which is the watts of our compact, how many days of the year it was going to be in use. And I'm saying that dehumidifier is going to run 20 minutes out of every hour during the day. So obviously being very aggressive in the runtime of that dehumidifier, and put in a 13 cents per kilowatt. And that's going to cost $126 for that time period for that compact 70 to run in that crawl space. So very energy efficient way to maintain the relative and moisture in that space. So while you might not be encapsulating crawl spaces, and you are interested potentially in adding that to your business lineup, we do have a 2-day building science encapsulation class that we offer. We have a restoration school outside of Atlanta, Georgia, that we've teamed up with that offers this. And we actually just offered this course up in Madison, Wisconsin at our headquarters in November for a group of contractors and distributor partners to be able to come up to Madison. 2 days, hands-on. We go over the building science of encapsulating crawl spaces. We actually have a mock-up crawl space that you encapsulate, and we take you on a tour through the plant where our dehumidifiers are made in Madison, Wisconsin. So if anybody's interested in that, you can reach out to me or anybody on our Santa Fe team to learn more details on that. But if you want to go a step further and learning more about encapsulation, this is the only building science course there is, and we actually teamed up with Advanced Energy out of North Carolina, which is the leading research firm on crawl spaces to develop this program, as long as some other building science experts, Joe Steenbrick from Building Science Corp, Allison Bales from Energy Vanguard. So a lot of people went into this knowledge. So nothing else like it that's offered out there. And then other resources for you. We do have a contractor portal on our website that you can sign up to have more access to information that's specifically for contractors. And then we do have an app that you can download on your phone that has all of our manuals, spec sheets, installs, and product videos. Both of these, you will see a lot of new resources and tools and training being added to for 2023. So this is a big focus for us for next year, is adding more into these two tools. And then if you're ever interested in adding our logos, you need a product picture, you need literature. On our website, underneath the About section, there is a tab called Media Resources, and we have all that information that you can download on our website as well. And we do have a Find a Pro locator. So if you are a contractor that is using Santa Fe products and installing them, and you're interested in us adding you to our Pro locator, if you go on this contractor portal and sign up, there's a checkbox there that says, do you want to be added to our Pro locator? And after that, verified that you are a Santa Fe contractor, we will add you to that resource as well. So that is what I have today on adding revenue by offering dehumidifiers. Again, looking at the opportunities in crawl spaces, there's a tremendous amount of revenue that can be generated by crawl spaces that are already being encapsulated. And it's just a matter of knowing what you're looking for and how to present it to the homeowner. And really, it's the only way to guarantee that that relative humidity is being controlled and their comfort is being improved, their house being improved, and their property is being protected. All right, I'll leave it here to see if anybody has any questions for me that they might want me to address. All right, would you ever need to bring in makeup air for a tight crawl space? Absolutely not from a code standpoint. From the point of, there are certain times of the year where maybe the relative humidity is lower outside and you want to use that drier air to dry the crawl space. You can use that to do that, but from a code standpoint or an indoor air quality standpoint, you do not need makeup air in a crawl space. Makeup air is typically for exhaust only. Well, I will say this, you would need makeup air if there's a combustion HVAC system located in that crawl space. And that would be for whoever encapsulated that or closed it to know before they do that, because yes, you cannot close a crawl space that has a combustion makeup air HVAC system in that space. But from an indoor air quality standpoint, there is no reason to ventilate a crawl space. Oh no, somebody can't hear my audio. It looked like everybody else could. I'm hoping that was resolved. If not, it will be recorded and we will send out this recording to everybody that was signed up. So if there are no more questions, we'll stop there. But again, if you do have something that you think of afterwards, please feel free to reach out to me or your Santa Fe representative, territory manager, and we'll be happy to help you. So have a great day, and thank you everybody again for attending.